Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Caster Calls with ZombieGrub. Today I have a Dota commentator, which actually I think might be one of the first or second. So it's a it's a rare occurrence, but obviously there's a lot of talent in the Dota scene. So I'm very happy to have Lyrical here. As you can see, Lyrical Dota on Twitter. So yeah, I think we're going to go over probably a bit of the Dota scene. And I do have maybe some very prying questions because obviously the international draws a lot of general attention. So I'm not a Dota person. I know a lot of StarCraft people have been. I am not. I do have a lot of respect for the talent and the pageantry that you guys get to work
Thank
with
you.
is basically the biggest thing in esports. So we'll be talking all about that and more, but kind of after we get to know you a little bit. So, how did you get into esports is always the first question.
Well, I've just always kind of been a bit of a nerd person, like since I was little. I don't know exactly when it was when first started playing video games, but super duper young, and that kind of developed more, I think, in college when StarCraft 2 came out. I played StarCraft 1 originally, back in the day, Brood War and a bunch of other stuff. But when StarCraft 2 came out, I was like, "Oh my god, this game that I loved, I'm finally gonna get a chance to watch it," and so I'd watch a ton of it, and, my wife, then girlfriend, and I actually, when we did a trip through Europe, we went to a StarCraft event, and got to go to one of the, like, DreamHack Opens, in Stockholm, and that kind of was always on the back burner, and then it was more like a hobby that I was interested in watching, and around 2015 or 2014, I kind of hated my job working as a chef, and I would go back home and play video games at night, and I kind of got, into a guild playing Dota 2 and started to play more and more often, and I would listen to people commentating my games of Dota, and I was like, "That seems like kind of fun," and I was like, "I'll hop in and try this out a little bit and see how it goes." And people liked it and said that I should keep doing it, and sort of went on to YouTube and uploaded a couple of casts onto there, and from that point forward, it just kind of blossomed out, and, Beyond the Summit got in touch with me, after a couple of, like, Reddit posts or something like that and said, "Hey, we'd
Hmm.
like to bring you out for this event," and, uh, they brought me on their channel, and it kinda just snowballed from there, so it was very much just like an organic. I didn't even really know that much about the Dota sphere,
Hmm.
before I got into it. And the first event that I went to, I didn't know who any of the people were down there, but it was like LD and, Parker and Winter and all these people that were, like, really well established in the esports scene. I had no idea who they were. They're just, like, random people to me. So it was it was a very strange, little period of time in my life.
Cool. So it happened organically, not a uncommon story in esports. Kind of just fell into it before you know it. But when would you say what year did you get invited out to the Beyond the Summit?
It was 2016. And so that was definitely was it? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 2016. It was like really a strange moment when I was getting married. I really, really didn't like my job working in the restaurant, and I was, for a long time, like, my wife and I had sort of been talking back and forth about what I wanna do next. We were sort of recovering still from the recession that got on when we both got
Mm-hmm.
out of college, and I had taken this job in the restaurant so that way she could sort of focus on her career and do what she wanted to do, and find a job that she loved, and then she wanted to sort of afford me that same opportunity. And so when we got married, we basically said, "Okay, we're gonna give this a try for a year, see what happens, and then we'll just keep going from there and see if it keeps on working." And I think it was like right around that 2016 time when the next couple of days after I got married was when I got invited out.
Nice.
Yeah,
It's two great things.
yeah,
Yeah. So the Dota scene is absolutely a bit of a mystery to me and perhaps to a lot of people.
yeah.
We kind of hear that there's some like backbone structure to it, but then a lot of the emphasis is on the international, which has caused it to be the most popular esports event pretty much in general, but it also means that a lot of the non-international Dota stuff gets a little lost unless you're like really into the scene. Would you say that when you were going into it, you were getting invited out, you realized, hey, I'm actually pretty good at this thing? Did you see it as like a viable moneymaker, or were you planning to have to like work up to a point where you could say, okay, this is like a job. It's paying roughly the same as a job.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was that the job that I was working in before was, like, not paying me that much either, so it wasn't that huge of a loss. But yeah, it wasn't really thought of, for me at least, as like a full-time job thing until I actually started doing it,
Hmm.
and I realized, "Oh, I can actually make a little bit of money for this." And I think that you're definitely right about the international being like this hallmark giant event that sort of eclipses everything else that's in the space. And that definitely has some negatives. It has some positives as well because there's always like a storyline leading up to it. But the problem is that that storyline is only relevant when you're actually at TI, and people really only want to pay attention when you're there. So you're sort of in this like double-edged sword of wanting to like say this tournament matters because they're going to be able to get to TI off the back of this. But it's like, well, shouldn't the tournament also matter just by virtue of it being a tournament that people care about? And that's kind of, I would say, a bit of a problem, and something that people are working on. They're trying to figure out how to make it work, and
Yeah.
how to provide some value outside of it.
And as a commentator, or just someone who's in the scene, can you talk a little bit about, how viable is it actually? Like, how many tournaments are we talking about happening outside of the international? How often are these guys competing against each other, or casters are getting work?
Right. So I think that the big thing that's changed in the last couple of years is that they've implemented something called the DPC, which is the Dota Pro Circuit, which is the lead up to TI that happens. And they've gone through a ton of different iterations of it. So the very first one that came out, there was going to be a minor and a major system. And for the very first season, it was 11 minors and 11 majors. And they all happened throughout the course of the year. That's a hell of a lot of work. And people were either getting work at the actual LAN events, or people were getting work in qualifiers to it, and it kind of spread out down the line. That has since been updated, and now there are 3 majors and 3 minors. But the thing that they've added is a league system that exists as, like, a ramp up to that and qualifications for it. And within each league, there are 6 different regions that play it out. So North America, South America, Western and Eastern Europe, China, and Southeast Asia. And within each of those, you're gonna have a couple of different commentators that work both within Division 1 and then within Division 2. Um, sort of the amount of, viewership and money that you're gonna be able to make off of that, varies a lot based upon what region you're casting, and that's definitely still something that keeps in mind, but there is a decent amount of work that you're getting throughout the year,
Hmm.
through the DPC.
Okay, good. So would you say that there's also a bit of like a ladder system for casters now with the system kind of fleshed out?
A little bit. I mean, it's all amorphous and, there's some amount of, like, not, I wouldn't say like politics in a negative way, but sort of like people that have worked with certain tournament organizers will work with them again. And you sort of build up these relationships with people. You build up your relationships with the region, because a lot of times you're interviewing the players afterwards when you're working on a desk or something like that. And so there is a bit of like a hierarchical ladder system, um, but it's largely like, uh, I don't know, I guess, like, unspoken-ish. There's,
Mm.
like, tier 1 and tier 2 divisions, but then within each of those, like, you'll have certain people that, like, they'll just work China, or certain people that will mainly just work South America, and then it's, like, kind of up to, what the fans' interpretations is of what that means, and really it's TI that kind of dictates the real, sort of division, and I think that there's been a lot of people that have risen over the last couple of years and have made a name for themselves in the scene.
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one when it comes to the oldest esports, which Dota's definitely in there. Is actually creating that opportunity for new talent to emerge when whether the old talent's doing a good job or not, it they are old the talent that's recognizable. So you come in around 2016. I think that was a couple of years after I really considered Dota to start like really taking off. Obviously, it was a big esport kind of begin with, but yeah, it kind of felt like StarCraft was the 2010,
Right.
2012. Then you had kind of this whole explosion of League of Legends, Dota, and CS:GO. Just commenting, being like, "Nope, we're top three. You're welcome." So, so did you when you came in like 2016? What did you look at the scene and say, okay, if I do this and this and work these events, I could, push myself to, let's kind of put it as like the S tier commentator. I know it's a very fluid
Yeah.
term, but did you see a goal? Did you see the yearly schedule ahead, or was it really just let's take what I can get?
I think that that started to happen for me a little bit more, around the 2017 time like that. And I think that there was a couple of tough moments for me where I had really had to like check my ego and check my like where I saw myself relative to what the results were. Because there were a couple of times where, I would see commentators that either A came up after me or some that came up before me that I felt like I'm better than, because that's, the mentality that you have to sort of break down in your own brain. And uh they would be getting jobs that I wouldn't get, or they would be getting, to go to tournaments that I didn't go to. And there was this pathway that I kind of saw, but I didn't really like I recognized that there was like a way to get there, but I didn't really see how. And I figured, okay, I'm just gonna try and keep getting better and see what happens. And like that basically was the only thing that I could do, was just keep trying to get better and then do as many matches as I could.
Mm.
Um, and that went on for a while, and I think that the big goal of all up and coming casters is to get to TI, and it was 2017 when I got to do it for the first time, working like the group stage of it at the very least. So it's definitely like a the more expectations that you build up for yourself in your own mind, it's like I think it can sometimes be a pretty negative thing. At least that was my own experience with it. There I went through a lot of like struggles where I had to like check myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the other guests on the show have talked about kind of sometimes a very big defining moment in their career, or just kind of like little tiny things that eventually they get told like, hey, you're being kind of a douche, or that was douchey. And we all kind of have that moment where we really like have to be brought down. Not necessarily because we're the most egotistical people, and there's always a little bit of ego in commentary and all that good stuff. Just that, and the recognition of that there are so many things factoring into talent hirings, and you can't
Mhm.
just be mad at the world. That's not going to be very conducive. So, or conductive, productive. There we go. But you did TI in 2017. That sounds pretty quick to me. Am I wrong? Were you one of the fastest rising stars, or there is that kind of the norm?
Maybe, I don't know. It's hard to like look back on it and reflect on it. To me, it felt like in reflecting on this, I think that I actually did start in 2015 for my first one. 2016 was the TI that I didn't get invited to.
Mm.
And then 2017 was where I finally got out to it. And I think that a big part of the reason is because a lot of the hierarchy that exists in Dota is that there's like, the TI tier 1, and then everything else is kind of like amorphously tier 2, and the question is, okay, who of that tier 2 is going to rise up? So there's always like one or two people that could be that person, and there's always this question of like, all right, what's the cutoff going to be? What's the person that's not going to get invited? And there were definitely people that had been in the scene for longer than me that uh I feel like were as good as me or whatever, and sort of got passed over for it. And um, I'm not sure what it was exactly
Mm.
that ended up getting me there, but I think that there's like a wide variety of people, and maybe some of it was also just that the people that had worked it. Um, I think at that point, a couple of them had stepped away from the scene as well, and that sort of leads an opening, and then it's a question of who's going to fill that.
All right. Is there a lot of, obviously not a lot of talent, but is there a fair amount of talent moving through esports? Like, is Dota casting, I guess, easily transferable to some other MOBA market? Like, I can't. I'm just gonna say,
Yeah.
from my perception, no, I don't see any Dota and League of Legends crossover, or any like
No.
Heroes of the Storm guys back when that was a thing. So, are these just natural kind of moving on in life, or people moving into other sports?
Yeah, there's a couple where people have moved on just in their life. They realized this wasn't necessarily what they wanted. There's some people, LD is one of the big examples, David Gorman, who now I mean, he and Dave Parker started Beyond the Summit, and then he had stepped away from casting into more of a, "I'm going to have to run this company," role, and that sort of left a space open in the play-by-play area. Um, you also have, certain people that I think just sort of fell out of favor with the community, and then they didn't really wanna have to take that battle of
Mm,
reestablishing themselves. So it's a wide variety, in terms of the different types of roads that people take. One of my really good friends, the person I actually casted with at TI7, Ben Wu, he went on to do programming stuff, and he had a really great blog that was talking about it and talking about the problems that exist as an analyst, specifically within Dota, and where he saw his future going if Dota didn't continue to be like a top tier esports. And he was like, I can't really afford to do this. He was very like frank about it and talking about how he felt like he wanted to secure like a better future for his family and all this stuff. And it was a really great blog post about it. But it sort of runs the gamut as far as like reasons why people leave.
yeah, of course. Would you say that a lot of Dota casting professionals have to have a side job, if you will, but like streaming, or dabbling into other games, or a lot of the like A to S tier commentators just pure Dota commentating?
I think you can get away if you're an ARS tier caster with not necessarily having to have a streaming as a second thing, but I think a lot of people do want to because there's this downtime in between tournaments and other stuff like that when there's more opportunities to build your brand and to create a revenue source outside of just casting. Because, you know, we've all seen that there's no guarantee that everything is going to last forever. And so having some other form or some other way to step to something else is just I think good planning on people's parts, and stuff that I think we all try and work on.
Hmm. Dota doesn't really seem like an esport that's afraid of just suddenly being, not like unimportant though.
Right,
The international still is getting, records and all that good stuff, but obviously still a worry for anyone in like a freelance role. I would say very generally, it's always a worry. In esports freelance as well. Is this actually something that you are consistently thinking of, or do you actually believe that, as far as it goes for a decent standard of living, you could just be Dota commentator for a couple of years before having to really worry?
I think I could still do it for a couple of years. I mean, I have no idea. Who the hell knows? Like, stuff is one of those things that, like, I can say this confidently, it's gonna be fine, but we really don't know. I am comfortable at this point that I feel like I've made enough connections and other stuff that I can move within the space of esports and do, other things if I need to. Also, you know, my wife and I are thinking about having kids at some point and potentially having some subset of this being, like, stay-at-home dad roles and then supplement our income in another way, like, that's all stuff that we sort of, uh my wife and I talk about at the very least.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that there's a lot of things that you can worry about, but more often than not, it's just like you just gotta it's kinda like what I was talking about before, where it's like I can worry about if I'm gonna be able to be the best that I can be, or I can just, like, keep trying to work on it and hope that things will work out the way that they, should.
Yeah. I do want to say, like, just because I'm part of a scene where it's very up in the air, and then
Right,
even some of the ones that seem to be very solid, like Hearthstone, they've also like kind of a fall from grace, forced by their parent company, which I think is
right,
always the concern in esports. We're not just just pick up a ball and play. Like there's this company that you're depending on. So
right.
that's why I ask, because it seems like from what I hear, isn't like kind of like the sibling rivalry thing is that the CS guys think that you guys get all the attention from
Right,
Valve.
I mean, yeah, that's the thing that's so interesting about it is that we just recently in Dota had the major, get canceled, because of COVID concerns, and then we've implemented this new thing. There's, like, a little bit of a hubbub about a little bit of a hubbub is maybe understating what it was, as the internet often does, it accentuated the things that people were upset about. But then there was this moment where CS:GO kind of switched and was like, "Oh, thank God that our major's not getting canceled," right? And so there's always the grass is always greener on the other side a little bit that goes on, and there are different teams that work on Valve, versus like work on Dota 2 rather than CS:GO, and they have different philosophies, it seems like, at least. I don't really know that well,
Hmm.
into the CS:GO scene at all.
Right. Yeah. I don't know a whole lot about what happens between them and Valve. Just that. Yeah, that's kind of the joke at the very least.
Right.
They think that you guys get taken care of, but they have, I guess, maybe more third party organizers or whatever. But it's
Right.
always funny. So bringing it back to, I guess, your journey specifically into this into the scene, into being a premier commentator. You already kind of mentioned some casting buzzwords like branding and play by play and all those
Yeah.
things we want to really get into. At what point did you start to think about this? And I guess not just at what point, but how did you start to think about yourself as a commentator? Like, when did you start to kind of dig deep and be like, okay, I need to learn how to do like branding. I need to know if I want to be a play by play or an analysis. Maybe I need to look for a partner that I work really well in. And then, what was your system for doing all these things and being in the place you are now?
System was just inertia, until a certain point. And I think that the certain point, like you're talking about, that came about was, um, basically when TI7 came around, and I looked at the space and I realized, okay, um, I'm already a play-by-play caster. That was sort of from the get-go what I was doing. I just didn't know the name for it necessarily. Branding, I think, came after, like, TI8, but around the TI7 time, and specifically when I said, Ben Wu, the guy that I was casting with, ended up moving on, I had worked with, and I still work with continuously, Trent, is Trent Pax on Twitter, and he and I were a really good combo together throughout the beginning times of, like, when I first got into sort of doing this more seriously as a job. We have a ton of games together that we've casted. And we sort of, reconnected and, decided that, we both wanna be able to work together. We're kind of it was a little bit of a weirder scene at that point because there was a bit more of like, talent working within certain studios. And so he was working with a studio called Moonduck, and I was working more with BTS, and they were kind of competitors, at the time. And so it was a little bit difficult for us to actually find a way to work together. But then at TI, all this sort of talent stuff goes away. He and I both got invited for TI8. Somebody at Valve or somebody involved in the hiring process had seen our casts before, and they really liked our style together. And so that was the point where we were like, okay, we're going to work super hard. We both got invited and we found out we're going to be casting together. Uh, that was the point at TI8 where we were like, we've got to really work on trying to create a ton of synergy, figure out what we want these casts to look like. What's the point of them? How do we make them entertaining? What is entertainment? Like, all of those big questions, that that you sort of take for granted. But when you boil down to the essentials, you try and like you, I don't know what the right word is for it. Like, you demystify the process a little bit and you try and actually find out, okay, what is actually entertaining about us? Why do people like us? And then try and like really drill into that.
Hmm. That all those things you just said, I couldn't list them fast enough, but that's all like I really want to get into and demystifying the process as well.
Perfect.
Um, but like first of all, I'm gonna ask is, did you guys try and emulate anyone from either the Dota casting scene or otherwise? A big name even outside of StarCraft 2 is Tastosis as far as
Yeah.
the branding and the synergy that they have. Was there anyone you looked to, for example?
I mean, we looked at all of it. We definitely looked at Tastosis. We definitely looked at the time it was OD and Fog, still is, a lot of the people that exist within Dota, because obviously there's differences that exist between the games and the pacing of how you want to cast it all. Um, and for us, it was a bit like the Bruce Lee making up his own kung fu, where we took these pieces that we liked from these certain casters. So, for instance, the OD, Pixel, really well known for like speaking really quickly and, listing out spell after spell after spell after spell. And for us, I I think that there are moments when I can do that for a little bit, and have those like hype moments, but I specifically know that, like, my ability to do that continuously, it's gonna deteriorate the quality of the casts down. And I remember one specific moment when one of like Owen's biggest casts that he did was this crazy moment where there's a character called Timbersaw, which has a lot of low cooldown spells and spams them out over and over and over again. And I remember hearing his voice crack a little bit in that moment. And it stuck out to me because I was thinking, okay, in that moment, that's where I would want Trent to come in and take over for a second. And then he carries that same like energy level of hype for a couple of seconds while I like regain my breath. And then I take back over. And that's something that we've worked on where we try and like cover up for each other's weaknesses a little bit and work on trying to find something that keeps like a similar energy level throughout. And like when I hit a big high moment, as a play-by-play, he comes in as an analyst at that same high point and then slowly whittles it down a little bit.
Yeah.
And working on those types of things.
That's yeah, really like detailed stuff, which I love. And actually, I would say, so I paid more attention than usual for the most recent Dota International, because I was just thinking more about commentary and looking at other inspirations. I am of still the opinion that Dota, like the analysis portions, the desk portions, are not my favorite.
That's fair.
But it's what the community likes, and it's always something to consider. Um, but I actually thought that this might be one of your biggest weaknesses, but I was pleasantly surprised when I listened to the commentators. So I was like, oh no, they're doing it fine, which is matching the
Right.
energy because yeah, it does feel like in general Dota is one of the harshest communities as far as like do you know your stuff. And
Yeah.
so what often happens is, maybe they bring in the person who does know the most, but they don't really look into commentary. They don't really think about it too much. And
Mhm.
even if they do think about it, they have not developed the skills to match hype casting.
Right.
So yeah, I was concerned about that. I was expecting the high, 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 high. And anyways, this happened. But it's awesome to hear that you guys, were specifically thinking about that and making sure to match it. So you're doing this with him and it's going great. And did you watch a lot of VODs of yourself to kind of like do this and match it? Like how much time did you have to prepare with him for the tournament?
Before TI8, we started a Discord server just for us talking about any casting stuff. So like we'd wake up at 1 in the morning in a panic and type something in because we're psychos like that. And I think that we had about 2.5 months or something like that. And basically what we tried to do was every day we'd hop on and play some Super Smash Bros. Melee together and just like chat and talk and like sort of do something together. And then the entire time that we were at the event, we would wake up in the morning from the hotel, go down to breakfast, talk about the games that were coming up, and just like chat and just try and have really good chemistry together. And so we would, just talk about all these things. And we talk about I would say that the thing that we ended up spending more time on that actually didn't matter as much is actually the games and, like, the analysis stuff, which is what's interesting. Like,
Mm,
that a lot of what happens at TI is the meta evolves itself, and then you sort of have to keep track of it there. So a lot of the things that came in that we thought were important weren't important. What was much more important was just the chemistry that we had together and then being able to react together,
mhm.
in an effective way.
Yeah. And that's a lot of what, in my opinion, most of the casters I've talked to have agreed on.
Right.
It's one of the first pieces of advice I got, and it's also one of the reasons that I did come up is because I just had good chemistry with one of my common co-commentators. So, but Dota, as I was just saying, it seems like it is
Yeah.
so much harsher. People give StarCraft a lot of credit, but I'm like, no, we're nothing like Dota's. Dota's the one that's all the fans are like, he didn't realize this was point second cooldown instead of 0.2 seconds, and I'm like,
Right.
okay. Um, so how do you balance that then? Like, do you truly believe that no, we're still in the situation that a lot of the commentators are? We're pretty much entertainment's first. Obviously, know your stuff. The
Right.
entertainment's first, or do you actually have to seriously consider the community aspect, which is seemingly, from my perception, a lot of clamoring for high level analysis?
So I think one is identifying like good faith attacks on you versus like just people being pissy. And I think that's one of the biggest things. So we do try and adjust, or I mean, I shouldn't speak for Trent. I try and adjust my commentary uh, based upon who is going to be watching it, and I have a pretty good idea of who's going to be watching each type of event. So if I do, um, a broadcast on a South American tournament, for instance, that's English audience is going to be significantly smaller, I'm going to pay attention to and talk about things differently than if it's at TI because the audiences are vastly different. And what ends up happening is I think a lot of times at TI, you're really doing your commentary for people that aren't that familiar with Dota and trying to still make it entertaining if you can. And that's difficult. And sort of throwing little hints here and there that you know what's going on. But instead of, discussing specific spell names in a cast, I might instead say like they control him or something as opposed to, Earth Spike onto
Hmm.
Sven for 2.5 seconds. Or I mean, I would never say that in a broadcast, but that type of thing, right? Like I say something that's more like easily accessible. And what I find is that more often than not, the like negativity gets drowned out just by the size of the audience. But I will say that I think Trent and I's like popularity is much more with people that have a lower range of like Dota info because we focus more on trying to make it accessible to as many people as possible.
Hmm. Yeah. And do you think that the community feedback is important? It's always a broad question I have to ask, but you said making sure to pick out the good faith
Right.
critique, absolutely. But is there anything more to that? Like, have you ever put an emphasis on going and reading Reddit like after a broadcast? I'd say most people don't, but I've heard a couple people say yes, I do read right after a broadcast.
I made a really big mistake at TI8 of reading everything. And it was again one of those moments where it like consumed me. And everything I was thinking like, okay, how are people going to think about this? How are people going to think about that? And it ended up with me just like having close to a freaking nervous breakdown, sort of. It was awful. It was really, really bad. And that was the point where, like, again, another moment where my wonderful wife sat me down and took my phone away, and everything was great after that. But it was this moment where I realized, okay, the main thing that I just need to be doing when I'm looking at Reddit is like looking, is something horrifically wrong?
Mm.
If something's horrifically wrong, I'll see a thread and I'll be like, all right, I messed up. If there's like 3 or 4 people that are just like they really don't like me, that's fine, and I just like put it away. So I'll just check to see like, all right, are there any threads with like 800 comments? And if there aren't, then I'm pretty okay with it. And that's kind of been my philosophy ever since.
Are you worried about the people hiring you considering the community feedback, or do you think that there's a true disconnect between the two? And you're not worried about the guy hiring for TI seeing a thread that says this guy sucks.
Uh no, that's not necessarily what it is. It's more that like that negativity can, I think, detract from the experience of watching a broadcast. And um the if there is something that I do wrong and I mess up on, it just kind of sucks. It's not necessarily that I'm worried that I'm not going to get hired by the people that hire me. It's more so that like I want to put out a good product, and make sure that people are enjoying themselves and having a good time watching it, I think.
Focusing on the broadcast does seem to be kind of a safe piece of advice. It's like
Right.
always do it for the betterment of the broadcast, not for the betterment of yourself or that guy that hates you on Reddit. And
Right.
you're like, shouting this out for you, man. I know that stuff. Not incredibly useful.
Yeah.
So you do all this great prep work, like amazing opportunity to work so closely with someone. Is this now the duo that everyone likes to see, or are you still working with a lot of other commentators?
I mean, we're still working. We have a bunch of really incredible talent that work in the Dota space. And I would say that I don't think that I think our profile has gone up a lot. We got to do TI Grand Finals this year, which was amazing. It was actually one of the coolest things that we got to do was share the Grand Finals with Owen, and Insania was casting with them, one of the Team Liquid players. Obviously, TI this year was really wild because it was in the midst of a Romanian COVID outbreak, so like the crowd got canceled and all that other stuff. But still, in the moment of being able to do that grand finals with them, where we traded off, where he did the first game, we did the second game, and bounced it off. I was expecting a lot more backlash and people to be upset about it because, again, generally speaking, I think that the more hardcore Dota audience not like dislikes us, but I don't think that we're necessarily their favorites. But what we really tried to focus on was like building the storyline of like these players and what this game means to them, what this tournament means to them, what all those things excuse me, matter for. And so I think that it did raise our profile a lot, and people are like, all right, they can do this. They're top tier. So that's good.
Yeah, that is good. That's a really interesting approach as well to the grand finals. I did not realize that's what they did.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about this last international, but I missed that one. Yeah. So did you like that? I mean, the whole people liked you aside, did you yourself as a commentator like breaking it up like that, or did you think that kind of worked opposite of the flow?
Yeah, so at first I was like, "What the hell are they doing?" But also, "Cool, I'll do it." But once I actually got into it, it was way better than I expected
Hmm.
because what ended up happening was, Trent and I were sitting there watching game 1, and we were thinking about, "Okay, what's the storylines that are being developed?" And we sat down, we just wrote. We were writing as we were watching the game, like, "Okay, what's the storyline that we can follow through on this?" And by game 4, because it went to 5 games, um, what happened was there was LGD, this Chinese powerhouse team that came in 2nd, very tragically at TI8. They came in 3rd, TI9 in China when all the hopes and dreams were on them. And then this was their supposed to be their year finally. And then Team Spirit, this young, like upstart team of 20 somethings from Eastern Europe that were like the world was on fire for them. And it was like this crazy like storyline of the old guard versus the new up and comers. And like we talked about in game 4, we were able to throw in a couple of these words about like, how much this meant specifically to this one player, Ame, and how tragic it would be if he lost. And then that is what ended up happening. And like that storyline that doesn't happen unless we have enough time in between games when we're casting to actually think about, okay, what does this mean for these players as they're in it? And so just having like more time to process throughout the course of a 5 game series, it was awesome. It would have been way worse if it was only 3 games, but because it went to 5, I think it was really good.
Very interesting. I can kind of understand it, although the pacing of our games are very different. Literally, the length of our games are very different.
Right.
Dota's quite long. But I guess I can kind of see how that works out. Do often any commentator is going to get caught up in a kind of like a lot of things. You can get caught up talking too much about the faction that you play
Right.
subconsciously, right? And yeah, if there was a break, I wonder if that would be beneficial. I don't think we'll experiment it with it anytime soon in StarCraft, but that is pretty cool. I mean, there's other experiments that have happened in the past in esports, for instance, trio casting. So League of
Mhm.
Legends even kind of looks towards that more so than duo, which is very interesting for them. Korean commentator is well known for having trio casts, and I know Dota has also experimented with it. I think it didn't it happen this recent one. So are you basically a fan of the change, especially after it kind of worked out for this one? Do you think that there could be room for more experimenting with just kind of the commentary way, I guess? Duo, swapping out between games, more or less commentators at events, all that good stuff.
I really hope that they do keep it for future events. I
Mm.
thought that it was great, for the reasons that I listed. Also, not that like you can't do it. I've done a bunch of grand finals that have gone to 5 games, but the quality of the cast, it's hard to maintain that throughout the course of 5 games and like 7 hours of yelling, right? Like it can get pretty intense, and so you're always fresh, which is I think really important. But then the other thing about it, what I'd mention about the trios is I like the idea of trios a lot. I think that it gives you a lot more flexibility, but my thought process with it is that it's like a thing that um feels like there's a higher ceiling as far as how good it can get, because you can have like more different like ways that the chemistry can synergize together and do cool things, and like you can have people pop in for just like one big one liner that's funny or awesome or whatever. Um, but it can also go way worse. Like the lower end of it is really bad, if people are just talking over each other. So I've done a couple of trios, Trent and I working with another former TI winner, Owie, and we've did a couple of events, and I felt like it was really good between us. But it definitely felt like something that we would have to work on in that same capacity that like Trent and I did back for TI8. We would have had to like sit down and have months to work on it.
Hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. It feels like there's a higher skill cap, but there's also a lot more room for error,
Yeah.
especially given the game could be even worse. So you mentioned, a lot of focus on the storylines. Being able to do that with the swapping out is excellent. Can you go into some real nitty gritty detail about how you prep, like practiced, studied storylines? Like,
Yeah.
did you have a billion tabs open on your computer? Were you reaching out to people and getting their perspective? How did it go?
So a couple of different things as far as storylines. One thing that really helped me with this was because I came in later, I had to do research early on about like, all right, who are these players? Because I don't know who any of them are. So I got in the habit of having to do that because there's like an expectation that you know who these players are, but I didn't, and I didn't know their history. So I had to hop onto Wikipedia, which shout out to whoever's doing all that because they're awesome. Um, and basically look through player profiles, have a tab open, and for myself at least, I've always been the type of person I studied where if I was taking notes, I would retain the information better. So, and that happened better than with typing. So I'd literally just like copy the Wikipedia page back over again of who these people have played with, who these people's former teammates are, and at TI in particular, a couple of the notebooks that I would have, I would write down for each individual team, okay, on team LGD, who have these players played with before that are currently playing in TI? So who are all of their former teammates? So every single time that LGD is playing against XYZ team, I would at least have it in the back of my head, hey, that's their former teammate. And then if I have a moment where I can bring that up in a cast, it might come up or it might not. Um, so Wikipedia pages were a big one. Going back through interviews that players have done, where I would find I would just like throw them on 1.5 speed, and then just like breeze through them and see if there's anything interesting that was there. And those are usually things that you can do like the day before, because at TI you find out like usually the day before, so what the matchup is that you're going to go for. And if there's any like last minute things that you want to do, you can just look up real quickly, like if there's a player that you want to highlight, and that type of stuff. So some of it you do beforehand, some of it you do day of, and that's just kind of, at least for me, my method.
Hmm. I think it's a good method. There's a lot of things that I do as well, so I have to agree.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. Um, and I was thinking, for my scene, it's really quite difficult to just kind of say like, well, I'm going to go listen to a couple of interviews these guys have done. Do you think that the kind of the pool of resources in Dota is considerable? Like, there's maybe even too much to watch and to know about all these guys, or do you also find yourself kind of going like, damn, I wish I knew that stat. I wish I knew what that player was thinking. And have you ever done any reaching out for it?
There's definitely times where like an excessive the resources can be there, but sometimes it's hard to access. Sometimes it's hard to find. And so sometimes aggregation can be a nice tool if people are doing that. Or like going back through and do like the Reddit search feature for a player's name and finding it there. So like there's a lot of information that's out there, but it's like actually one, getting that information for a cast, but two, if you're thinking about creating it, making it like monetizable, which isn't always easy either, for people to do it. So, for instance, I've wanted to do, and I've done a couple of player interviews, and upload them to my YouTube channel, and occasionally I get like a good amount of hits on them or something like that. But it's mainly just about like trying to get some more in-depth information about them that is about like a specific topic, because like there are people that are streaming all the time, there are people that are playing all the time on their Twitch channels, and then it's not necessarily like they're talking about their careers or what the game means to them or their history or things like that. It's just, they're just pubbing.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be really difficult to find those tidbits. But you sound really smart. If you're just coincidentally watching a
Right.
pro and they say something smart, you're like, that sounds so smart in the broadcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I YouTubed your name and saw a couple of interviews. What was also interesting was that a lot of the like the top 10 like shoutcasting moments of Dota type videos also popped up. So I was
Mhm.
like scrubbing through them to see your highlight moments, and I saw a couple. Your play-by-plays, as you were saying, like that's kind of where you put yourself. I know in other interviews, you said that like you kind of just fit wherever you need to go, but you've done play-by-play the most.
Right.
Would you say that at any point you worked like a dedicated craft on improving your play-by-play, or has it actually just been a lot of practice?
So there's been some things that I've definitely worked on. I used to, so there's been some things that I've worked on that I feel like have been helpful, and some things, a lot of things that I've worked on that haven't been helpful, um, or like very limited amount of helpfulness. So I used to do, I almost got an English minor when I was in college, and I did a lot of stuff with poetry and like meter and working on how to sort of, I mean, write things, but then speaking it to which syllables you accent, which syllables you put emphasis on, and in what order. That type of thing can be a little bit helpful for like certain moments. So like for big moments, the one I think it's called Anapest, where it's like 2 unaccented and then an accented syllable, so it's the same meter as they write "'Twas the night before Christmas." So,
Mm.
"'Twas the night before Christmas when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. And so that rhythm, I think, is something that I tried to emulate when I have, like, a big moment at the end, kind of. That and then, like, an I am, which is just an unaccented and then an accented syllable. And so, like, trying to hit a specific timing and, like, something like that sort of puts some more emphasis on the last word. Um, it's weird,
That's
but
awesome.
it's
No, I'm super impressed. That's awesome. You know, like because you're definitely it's episode 42, I think, and you're the first person that's brought up such specifics. I've had theater majors bring up a lot of specifics. I've had debate, uh, I guess doers, people in debate tell me what
right.
they learned. It's the first time I think I've heard someone like talk about like those words you use, the words I
Right.
definitely learned in English and have totally forgotten about. So that's super impressive. I don't think a lot of people think
Right.
about it in that context, but that is super cool. I kind of want to experiment with it myself, like
Go
get an
for it.
end of a cast and do like it's the night before Christmas.
Right. Oh, I mean, that's the thing. If you throw out that, it's and this is what I mean, where it's like there's moments where it can be helpful, but I think the bigger thing is not like it's not like sticking to a specific rhythm, but it's understanding that there's a rhythm to your words
Yeah.
and then using that. And that's I think the biggest thing is like there's a couple other things with like false chord screaming, which is like the death metal stuff, which is like
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
I had to learn this because I started to like mess up my throat a little bit and I like, all right, how do I get loud without making a ton of without like messing up my voice?
Yeah.
And so that was like something where I researched it. It's not like I'm doing screamo metal, but I'm learning how to use my voice a little bit more efficiently. And then the other big one that I've been working on that I like a lot is exercises with verbal fluency. So it's the same type of stuff that like English as a second language teachers use to try and get people to be better at like taking an idea and then recalling it and then putting that into practice. And the idea being that like if you're really good at being able to like quickly and I mean, I think basically the idea by it is just becoming a better speaker in general, right? And you can use the same exercises that people use to become fluent in English to become like more fluent.
Cool.
Yeah.
It is I always love learning about trying to figure out what makes someone just sound nice.
Right.
Because that is a quality that can be taught, but I don't think any of us are actually truly taught that. Even if we went to like speech therapy, even if the English is a second language, it's not the context isn't well, how do you sound better?
Right.
Maybe if I went to broadcasting school, maybe they go over it. But
Right.
it's such like the even though it sounds foundational, it's like the mechanics of your voice. It's one
Mhm.
of the last things I think that a lot of esports commentators especially learn because so many of us just kind of we do the thing and we do more of the
Right.
thing and then before we know it we maybe want to be good at the thing. Um, so it's
Right.
really interesting to hear all these backgrounds actually work out for individuals, and I think there's a future where everyone has come together and kind of agreed like these are really important things to learn, and there's going to be like an esports class that includes these things, and I'm very excited for that future. Right
Right.
now, I'm just Yeah, I'm just trying to collect everything, get
Well,
every possible way
well,
of studying.
totally. But I think the thing that you pointed out though is really important that like practice is like I only started doing this when I was like 90% of the or like 80% of the way there and wanted to bump it that extra bit, right?
Hmm.
Like cuz you learn way more by just being in front of a camera and talking than you do by studying any of this stuff. And I think that that's also really important in what you're talking about that like all this stuff is only important insofar as like you've already put in the work to get to where this matters.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to be said about just doing something, right?
Right.
And then also just about kind of figuring out what works for you. And so it's maybe not the most absurd thing to think is the foundations being taught last. Plenty of people play golf with their dad who don't teach
Right.
them foundations, but then you go to a teacher and you learn the foundations. So it makes it's not abnormal. It just is always interesting to think about. 'Cause I think especially for esports, I've talked to a couple of broadcasters of traditional sports,
Mhm.
and they have been very impressed with the skill that esports commentators have. And then
Really?
I tell them, like, oh, there's no formal training, and they're like, oh wow, they're really good. Um, and then sometimes they also point out why, someone is considered really good amongst the community, but actually there's a technical quality that they're missing. And
Mm,
I found that also very fascinating, but I won't name who it was or anything. But
okay.
it's really cool to think of. Play-by-play commentators, and both of them will be extremely highly regarded, and the guy will be like, this guy inflects really well, so I can understand everything he's saying even though he's speaking fast. This guy depends way too much on speaking quickly to cause excitement rather than inflecting correctly, and I'm like, that
Hmm.
guy's considered one of the best play-by-play commentators. And he just like ripped them apart.
Damn.
Fascinating stuff. I do want to get into our Patreon questions, make sure we have time for
Sure.
those. Even though I would love to go deeper into all of this stuff. I think it's so cool.
I could talk about forever. It's got to cut me
Yeah.
off at some point.
But we got the first question here. I was wondering how they deal with the readability of Dota. In my experience of watching casually, basically at TI, it's easily the most impenetrable sport I've watched. Between all the acronyms and the fact that you can't, or is difficult to see hero upgrades, it seems impossible to parse.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's true. I mean, it's a very difficult game, and there's been some efforts, one within casting, to like sort of like I was talking about earlier. I think that there's been an emphasis recently of us trying to use phrases that aren't necessarily just the hero ability names, but like actually talk about what the abilities are doing. Huge amount of damage quickly, controlling the enemy, that type of thing. But then the other thing is that there's been some things implemented outside of the game. So there's a Dota 2 tooltips Twitch extension, which is on a lot of the big broadcasts now. Where basically, if you're on a Twitch broadcast of a Dota game, you can hover over the spells and it will pop up a little window that shows you what the spells are, how they do, what it looks like. And that's something that like it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. If somebody wants to learn more, they can that way. And it's a way to like quickly reference, like, oh, what does that spell do again? How does it work? And then you can pull it up and then it shows it. And those types of things I think are really good for it. And then beyond that, it's just, I mean, there's no getting around it. It's a complicated game, it's
Yeah.
5-player chess. Um,
Yeah.
and learning what all those pieces do is tough.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to because I need to keep this podcast, not at 4 hours. But there's even more questions I could ask about how Dota guys actually parse through fights. Because that's where the
Right.
play-by-play moments I was watching were about. They're about fights, and I watched it and I was like, "This sounds exciting. It looks like fireworks, but what the hell's happening?"
What's going on? Yeah.
But yeah, we can't get too into that. Second question. What's something you think Dota 2 esports coverage, such as hosting and commentary, could be doing better?
Um, I think that again, the big thing to me is storylines. That to me is the most exciting, interesting, and readily accessible thing that somebody can relate to, even if they don't understand Dota. And there's a really big emphasis within the community on breaking down specific um breaking down, like, specific interactions, things that are, like, very niche and very cool, and I understand why, and I think that it's really good, and those are the things that I'm interested too, because when you get more and more into Dota, it's those little things that are the reason that you play. It's like, "Oh my god, do you see that interaction? He cast a Lincoln Sphere onto him point 2 seconds before the Hex came out, and then they cast a second Lincoln Sphere on him so that way he was able to interrupt the Sunder." Like, all these little things that, like, are really dumb, but super nerdy and cool. That's like the type of play that, like, when you make it in Dota, you feel like a god. And so getting to see other people do it is so interesting and unique. But if you don't play, it's like you have no idea what this panel is talking about.
Hmm.
But it's the moment that, like, decided the game and won them the fight. And to me, at least, I think the thing that we could work on is finding a way to mention those things, but instead of highlighting how, like, mention that those cool moments are happening, but more focus on, like, okay, what does this match mean? What's the history of this player? They've lost 2 TIs in a row at the same point, and it's been the same team that knocks them out over and over again. That's a story that I feel like casual players or, casual fans or people that aren't even Dota fans can understand that, like, oh my god, that guy got knocked out 2 times in a row. Oh
Yeah.
no, the same team. So that's to me at least what I feel like is cool.
I think it's actually really something that a lot of esports have to strive for. A lot of esports in particular, because we're not as basic as a lot of traditional sports. The ball doesn't go in the hoop. Well, Rocket
Right.
League does, and that's why they probably are
And that's
doing
cool
really
too.
well. But with other parts, it's we have to find something that is easily attached to, and human stories are always pretty safe bet. I will say that I thoroughly enjoy their nerdy moments when someone is just allowed to nerd out. I
Yeah.
think the worst thing that can happen is when the analysis is forced to calm themselves down and speak slower, because maybe it is better for communication. It's so much more, what's the word? Like, invigorates me when I would just watch some guy nerd out about those details.
Yeah.
So I love hearing about them, but absolutely, if you're just going to try and kind of grab a big old net of people who aren't quite like, what? Huh? Then saying this guy just lost 6 championships in a row, can't he win
Yeah.
this one, is so much more appealing.
Right.
We had one of those moments where I don't think anyone cared about the games themselves. It was 6 games of 7 game series, and a guy named Sue, he had like literally 7 second place championships.
Cool.
And he's like, can he finally win one?
Yeah.
I don't think anyone cares about those games, but he won it. And he ended up like crying on stage, and we never
That's
get
so
that.
great.
Yeah, and it's just so great. Like, everyone knows that's a good story. You tell the story and people go, "Oh," and they don't even know the
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
So I think it's something especially that esports commentators strive for. So it maybe isn't a super detailed answer. I think a lot of people would say it, but it's because it's so true. You really need
Right.
to bring those storylines out.
Yeah.
So big thing about play-by-play commentary as well.
Yeah.
Trying to make sure those narratives have like a string throughout the game. So many things that go in the commentary. That's
It's
why I like
crazy.
doing this.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're just about wrapped up. So I'd like to give this opportunity for you to shout out where you're going to be, what tournaments are coming up that you might be casting.
Yeah, so I don't think everything has been announced yet, so I can't announce it all, but I will be doing some stuff soon that's gonna be awesome. So follow me on Twitter and I'll let you know when it comes out.
Nice.
But beyond that, I think on my YouTube channel, I'm gonna be trying to do a couple more videos that are about player stories and things like that, because just make the content you want to see. And hopefully it's good, and probably it won't be, and then it will be better, and then it's going to be awesome. And yeah, that's all I got.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you again for joining me. It's been a lovely hour of talking about casting. Thank you guys out there for listening to this podcast. Special shout out to Shayne for co-producing it. And a big thank you to all the Patreon supporters that go above and beyond. Nick, Vinny, Steven, E.T., and Ravi, thank you guys very much. Looking forward to seeing you for the next episode of Caster Calls with ZombieGrub. Bye.
Thank you for having me.